over the years talking about the work at Princeton and his own work and the work of others. But we're using the Internet now, and I hope you heard the first hour. If not, listen to it in the archives, to do the same kind of data mining, looking for clues, looking for trends, as it were, in advance. Because we, as a species, a sentient species, at least allegedly so, have the ability to tune in on what is going to happen. Does it mean there is only one future reality? Not necessarily. We're not going there. But it does indicate that whatever is about to happen is indeed picked up by an awful lot of people. George, go ahead, please.
Where do you want me to start?
You can choose the area, but there's so much to talk. We could talk for 6 hours on this. Let me think about this for a second. Probably let's talk about some other hits that you've had.
Oh, sure, that's easy.
The cleanest one, I think, is the Northeast Power outage.
George, you do one, George, and we'll have Clif do one.
Yeah, let me do one. Back in, I want to say, February of 2003, we had a lot of language going to the idea of a big maritime disaster. We had gem of the ocean. We had all kinds of descriptors going to ship, accident, disaster, big emotional stuff.
Now, may I interrupt just for a minute? I want everyone to come along at the same pace here. They are not saying that people were on the Internet predicting these things. I want to make that real clear.
Correct.
These are not predictions. I predict that. No. This is reading between the lines, as it were, even though they're reading the lines. All right, go ahead.
Exactly. The way Clif's software works is you take the output from 200 different programs, if you will, that slice and dice the language of the Internet, and you put them up in the Lisp interface of IntelliCAD, and you get all these scatter points in model space. Mm-hmm. And each one of those points, when you look at it, it's sort of like a reverse phone directory lookup. So in early 2003, Clif was looking at a context involving maritime accident, maritime disaster, and so forth.
And it just went on and on and on.
Yeah. Turns out that the maritime disaster and the gem of the ocean references and so forth had to do with the Columbia disaster that followed in May 2003.
Got it.
So I mean, that's one of the problems, and that's really where I've got some value to the project, is when Clif does the reverse lookup to find out what is changing in model space, you almost have to be able to take your head and say, gosh, what does that sound like? What would resonate down at the archetype level? And so at the archetype level, space ship and sailing ship are almost the same, which is, by the way, probably why we have the U.S. Navy Space Command in, what is it, Kansas?
U.S. Navy is so heavily invested in outer space, most Americans wouldn't believe it if they were told the truth.
Oh, yeah. Well, we understand that. And that's perhaps one of the reasons that the lookups, when you see one of these dots in model space, you have to open your head so wide in order to encompass all the possibilities. And so while we were looking for something like, two cruise ships colliding, all hands lost kind of a thing, it because that was the size emotionally that would meet the model parameters. Instead, we got the space ship and the Columbia disaster and a huge emotional impact that came along with that. So the technology, although it keeps evolving, it ain't perfect. On the other hand, when it's right, it is spectacularly so.
Clif, how many? Go ahead, George. Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. You had a question. I was going to say
how many? All right, how many references to this kind of thing, this paradigm of maritime accident, would your software come up with? Approximately.
In that particular instance, the first time we came across, we slice our data into three broad categories: immediacy, short-term, and long-term. And so the immediacy data normally gets processed first, so we would, for instance, it would be like coming across just a few little clues, and we might get 2 or 3 or 4 or 5,000 references to something percolating in the ocean. Word ocean in a forum that it shouldn't be in, and this kind of thing popping up all over. And then as time goes by, it either builds or dies off. If it continues to build, we watch it, and then we'll label it. If it continues to grow faster than normal, so to speak, and then we'll track it. And then we decide, okay, we can make a forecast off of this. Something is actually building before our eyes in model space. And it might get up to where it reaches 20 or 30,000 references before we go ahead and label it and say, we think we've got something here.
There's two interesting books or things to read that sort of explain how this stuff percolates into reality, or at least it helps frame it for us. One of them is, have you ever read the book Timeline?
No.
Oh, okay. I even forgot who wrote it. Famous author. Michael Crichton.
Crichton.
But it's about how events, at least at a technical level, it's about how events start down at this quantum foam layer, and then they percolate, and grow.
And solidify, in essence, yeah.
Yeah,
So
they sort of materialize.
Which came first, the event or the mass subconscious creation of it?
Well, it doesn't matter. If you really want to get down to it and you start talking in Tom Bearden kind of language, E equals MC squared, and you reverse the equation, it does not matter because you're looking at two sides of the same coin.
Understand.
Our consciousness exists in this world, this material universe, in a space-independent framework, but a conscious fixed point. We can't change our consciousness, but we can move it around in reality.
You get my point. It's like a seed of cancer, a malignant cell at some level. An idea, a concept will begin to grow, resonate, and then permeate this subconsciousness and become a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's one side of the coin. Turn it over, and you've got circumstance dictating it, and it creates it, and it's read by the consciousness.
Okay, exactly.
Is that fair?
That's fair to say. If we think of humans walking around antennas, and depending on how we're doing, how our physical bodies are doing, our consciousness, whether we're depressed or happy or whatever, we may be more or less receptive at any given time. So if we're walking around with our antennas open, and a lot of us are really feeling good and so on, then we're going to pick up a lot, and it'll sort of show up fairly easily on the internet if you know to go and look for it.
Okay. All right.
Believe me, we're not the only ones doing this, by the way.
Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. Cliff, go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to bring up a couple of points. We do have some spectacular hits. We're getting better at it because we finally clued in about 2003. Bear in mind, I got the idea in about 1994, but it's been evolving over time. But around the time that George really became very active in it, we got a couple of different theorems out of his screwy little brain, and we've applied them. And some of the things that have come into focus one of them has been this idea of visibility. So events happen, but it may not be emotionally visible to a lot of people. And in the case of the maritime disaster he was talking about, one thing we knew was that it was going to be very visible, and a lot of people would have an emotional reaction to it. So we thought, oh, geez, how horrible, 2 cruise ships crashing, thousands of people dead, because we couldn't really envision anything else that would reach the headlines in such a way as to cause the same level of emotion. How wrong we were.
Okay,
but
George.
We had a lot of the linguistics. Maybe 70% of the linguistics that showed up we had come across in advance.
Wow.
Then there's other ones like the Northeast power outage, where we had 98% correlation with the linguistics after the fact, and we had it 3 weeks early.
3 weeks early?
Yeah. It was at least 3 weeks, wasn't it, George?
Oh, it was 3 or 4 weeks, and we had everything. I mean, we had power flows south, we had
regional indicators, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Now, these are
descriptions of the properties that broke down, train yards described, this kind of thing.
But these are not, again, I want everyone to understand, these are not predictions. These are actual statements, fragments, words, expressions pulled out of the Internet, out of the stream of prose or text, if you will, online, and pieced together, and then collated. And these are shifts. These are changes. These are new, unusual behaviors, as it were, of the printed word. the non-spoken language. This is amazing. Back in a minute, and as you heard Clif say just a minute ago, we're not the only one doing this. And we'll talk about that and other things as we continue. The website is Half Human, Half Past Human. Well, Half Human. Kind of fits, too. HalfPastHuman.com. Visit it. Spend some time there. This is an amazing thing. You think of David John Oates and reverse speech and all the things we've explored over the year. This is remarkable. Back in just a minute. All right, let's get right back to our conversation with George and Clif. All right. One or two more, if you would, George, of your successes, just to give people an idea of the breadth of this issue. It's quite wide.
Oh, gosh. We've got one going on right now. We've got the winds that gouge in model space. For some period of time, we've had references to devastating winds that essentially do unexpectedly great damage worldwide as well as in the United States. And as we look at the tornado season that's evolving across the U.S., it seems to be running well ahead of previous numbers. Uh-huh. So there's that kind of thing.
Uh-huh. Very good. All right. Now, Clif, you mentioned you're not the only one doing this.
That's correct. And I think George will have to refresh my memory here, but in 2003 or 2004, well, we initially, in a flurry of patriotism in 2001, we offered, or to early 2002, we offered the software concepts, et cetera, to the Black Ops guys to go and play with. And they kind of said, well, it's interesting, but not our line of country. So George and I go off and we play in our garage some more. And then there used to be this concept where you could actually use other servers, but a different story. But in any event, we came across some source code and swept it up. Accidentally, weren't intending to, just grabbed it, and it turned out to be very sophisticated source code that did the same kind of thing using a different programming language than ours, but did the same sort of thing, and it originated out of China. Uh-huh. And it was interesting to discover that we weren't the only minds looking at things this way. Mm-hmm.
It was. Oh, go ahead, Cliff.
I would say, George, wasn't that 2003?
Yeah, it was 2003, and it was it showed up for us as what translated into English as the cauldron, and I think it was ting or some such in Chinese,